Nobody prepares you for 80. That is the first thing I want to say, and I want to say it plainly without softening it into something more comfortable than it is. The books do not prepare you. The doctors do not prepare you. The well-meaning conversations with family do not prepare you. The people who love you most will talk around it, above it, beneath it, in every direction except straight at it, because straight at it is the direction that requires them to face something they are not yet ready to face. And so you arrive at this age, if you are lucky enough to arrive here, with almost no honest information about what you are walking into. You arrive with the vague cultural image of a rocking chair and a warm blanket and grandchildren nearby, and then you find the reality, which is far more complex and far more interesting and far more demanding than anyone thought to mention. I want to tell you what no one told me. I want to tell you the things I had to discover by living them, the things that surprised me, unsettled me, and ultimately, when I had processed them long enough, gave me a kind of understanding I would not trade for anything. Because the years after 80, however they arrive and whatever they contain, are not a diminishment of life. They are a different relationship with it, and you deserve to know what that relationship actually looks like before you are standing inside it wondering why no one warned you. The first thing no one tells you is that the body becomes a conversation partner rather than a tool. For most of your life, your body was something you used. You directed it, you pushed it, you occasionally ignored it, asked it for more than it wanted to give, and it mostly complied. The relationship was one of unconscious authority. You were the boss and the body was the vehicle, and as long as the vehicle ran, you did not think about it very much. After 80, that relationship changes completely. The body begins to speak, and it speaks continuously, and it expects to be heard. A knee that aches in cold weather is not a malfunction. It is a message. Fatigue that arrives by early afternoon is not laziness. It is information. The tightness in the chest when you climb stairs, the way your hands move more slowly than your mind intends, the new and specific relationship between sleep and how the next day feels. These are not failures. They are a conversation, and the quality of your life after 80 depends almost entirely on whether you learn to have it. The people who struggle most in this decade are almost always the ones who keep treating the body the way they treated it at 50, who push through signals instead of listening to them, who interpret every limitation as an enemy to be defeated rather than a truth to be understood. And the people who move through their 80s with the most grace are the ones who made peace with this new arrangement, who learned that managing their energy rather than spending it freely is not weakness, who found that honoring the body's actual capacity rather than fighting it is the more intelligent strategy. The body at 80 is not less than the body at 50. It is wiser. It knows more. It has survived more. It simply requires a different kind of relationship, and building that relationship is some of the most important work of this decade. The second thing no one tells you is how differently time moves. I do not mean that days go faster, though many people report that experience. I mean something more fundamental. Time stops being a resource and becomes a texture. When you are young, time is something you have or do not have, something that passes or does not pass quickly enough. It is always in relationship to something you are trying to accomplish or somewhere you are trying to arrive. After 80, that structure loosens. The future shortens in ways that cannot be ignored, and what that shortening does, unexpectedly, is intensify the present. Not in an anxious way, not in the way that might sound frightening from the outside, but in a way that makes the ordinary more vivid. A meal eaten slowly and with full attention becomes something it never was when you ate it between obligations. A conversation that has nowhere it needs to arrive becomes a different kind of exchange than the ones you had when your mind was always partly somewhere else. The light at a particular hour in a particular season carries a quality you never had time to notice before. This is one of the things that most surprises people about life after 80 when they actually arrive there. They expected diminishment. They find instead a strange intensification. The world, stripped of the noise and forward momentum of earlier decades, reveals itself as having always been more interesting than they had time to notice. And this intensification is available to anyone willing to receive it, but it requires releasing the habit of always looking ahead, always measuring the present against where you meant to be by now. The present moment, it turns out, was worth far more than you were paying for it all those years. The third thing no one tells you is about loss, not the fact of it, because everyone knows that loss accumulates in old age, but the particular texture of loss after 80. By the time you reach this decade, if you have lived a full life and loved a full range of people, you will have already carried considerable grief. Parents, perhaps. Friends from earlier chapters. The version of yourself that existed at 40 or 50. But the losses after 80 have a quality that is different from all the ones before. And the difference is this: they begin to outnumber the relationships themselves. You reach a point where more of the people who knew the younger versions of you are gone than remain. And that means something very specific. It means that entire periods of your life, entire eras with their particular flavor and light and cast of characters exist now only in your own memory. There is no one left to call and say, "Do you remember that summer? Do you remember how things were then? Do you remember who we were?" You become, in a very real sense, the sole custodian of those years. This is a weight that people who have not arrived here cannot fully understand. It is not only grief for the individuals gone, though that is real and ongoing. It is a particular kind of aloneness that comes from being the last one who remembers. And the response to it, the healthy and sustaining response, is one that most people are not prepared for. The response is to become a keeper. To write things down, speak things aloud, give the memories somewhere to go beyond the solitary interior of one mind, not because they need to be shared for anyone else's benefit, but because the act of tending them, of articulating them, of bringing them out of silence into language, is a form of honoring both the people who are gone and the self that loved them. The people who find meaning in their 80s almost always have some practice of this kind. A journal, conversations with family where they are the one doing the telling, letters written to people living and gone. The meaning is not in the audience, it is in the act. The fourth thing no one tells you is that the question of who you are becomes more urgent, not less. There is a cultural assumption that by 80 you have settled. That identity is a question for the young, and that the old have long since arrived at a stable answer. But that is not what happens, at least not for the people I have observed most closely. What happens instead is that the roles and structures that provided identity for decades begin to fall away, and underneath them, sometimes for the first time, there is the actual person. The worker, the parent, the spouse, the community pillar, the one who organized everything. These are not only roles. They are, for many people, the answer to the question of who they are. And when the children are grown and gone, when the career is decades in the past, when the spouse may be gone, when the body no longer permits the activities that defined you, you are left with a question that has no structural answer. It must be answered from the inside. This is frightening for many people. It is also, for those who find the courage to stay with it, the most interesting thing that has ever happened to them. Because the person who remains when all the roles have been removed, when there is nothing left to do or manage or perform, that person turns out to be genuinely worth knowing. All those decades of being busy and necessary and identified with function had covered something that was there from the very beginning, a particular way of seeing, a set of responses to the world that are irreducibly yours, a quality of presence that has nothing to do with what you produce or provide. Finding that, at 80 or 85, feels less like a discovery than a reunion. You recognize it. You have always known it was there. You simply could not hear it over everything else. The fifth thing no one tells you is about the relationship between fear and freedom at this age, and how strange and counterintuitive that relationship turns out to be. People who have not yet arrived at 80 tend to imagine that this decade must be saturated with fear. Fear of death, obviously, fear of decline, fear of becoming a burden, fear of the specific losses that everyone knows are waiting somewhere ahead. And yes, those fears exist. They visit. Some of them settle in and stay a while. But what many people who actually live through their 80s report is something paradoxical. Alongside the fears, and sometimes displacing them entirely, there is a freedom that they never anticipated, a freedom that has been purchased slowly and painfully by the very thing that generates the fear. The closer you live to the boundary of your own life, the less certain things can frighten you. The opinion of someone who never understood you stops carrying the weight it once did. The approval you never quite received from someone who was incapable of giving it stops being worth the energy of wanting. The comparisons you made against other people's lives, the ways your own came up short, the achievements you did not reach, the version of yourself you meant to become by now, these things, which could consume enormous amounts of energy in earlier decades, begin to lose their power. Not because you stop caring about your life, but because proximity to its end clarifies what in it was ever actually worth caring about. I have watched people arrive at their 80s still carrying grievances from decades ago, still nursing wounds that happened when they were 50, still waiting for apologies that are never coming, still defining themselves partly by what was done to them. And I have watched those same people, as the years moved through them, slowly set those things down, not always willingly, not always with grace, but eventually, because the energy required to carry them forward became energy that could not be spared. The result, in almost every case, was a lightness that was visible to anyone who knew them. The face changes when you stop carrying old weight. The body moves differently. Something that had been tense for years finally releases. The sixth thing no one tells you is about what happens to time with the people you love. I do not mean time in the sense of more or less of it. I mean the quality of it. The texture of a conversation with a child or grandchild after 80 is different from what it was before. And the difference is one that takes most people by surprise. You stop needing the conversation to go anywhere. You stop needing it to resolve something or establish something or move toward a conclusion. You become capable of simply being in the presence of someone you love without any agenda at all, and discovering that this, which sounds like so little, is actually the most intimate thing two people can do together. Most of the conversations in a human life are partly about something else. Partly about managing the relationship, partly about being understood, partly about the future. The conversations that are purely about nothing but the immediate fact of being together are rarer than we realize, and they become possible more naturally and more often in the decades when the future has shortened enough that the present is all there is. Grandchildren who sit with their grandparents in these years, if they are paying attention, often describe something they cannot quite articulate. A quality of being fully seen. A sense that the older person is not looking past them toward anything else, not managing a situation or planning next steps or half present while thinking about something they need to do. Just there. Entirely there. That quality of full presence which the grandchildren experience as a gift is one of the unexpected fruits of a life that has run long enough to stop needing to be elsewhere. The seventh thing no one tells you is that the question of meaning does not resolve. This one surprises people. There is an expectation, I think, that by 80 you have answered the big questions, that the search for meaning is something that occupies the young, and that age brings resolution, a settled understanding of what it was all for, why it went the way it went, what you were here to do, and whether you did it. But meaning does not work that way. It does not arrive at a final answer and rest there. It continues to be negotiated, continued to be found and lost and found again, continued to require your active participation rather than your passive reception. The difference is that after 80, the search itself becomes less desperate. You stop needing the answer to be large. The large answers, the ones that require a whole life to mean something in the aggregate, are less accessible and less necessary than the small ones. Why am I here today? What is this hour for? What does this particular connection between me and this person in this moment contain that is worth attending to? Those questions, humble as they sound, are the ones that actually sustain people in their 80s, and answering them repeatedly in the ordinary fabric of ordinary days is what meaning looks like when you have lived long enough to know it. I want to speak for a moment about something that is difficult to put into language, but that I believe is among the most important things to say. There is, in life after 80, a kind of companionship with your own past that is unlike anything available in earlier decades. Not nostalgia, which is a longing for what is gone, but something more stable than that. A relationship with everything you have lived that is no longer filtered through regret or desire or the wish that things had gone differently. A settled acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance, that the life you lived was the life you lived, that it contained what it contained, that the losses were real and the gifts were real and none of it can be unlived, and that all of it taken together is yours. That is yours in a way that nothing else ever quite is. No one can give it to you and no one can take it from you. It is the accumulated fact of your own existence, and after 80, many people find that they can stand inside that fact with a kind of peace that they never expected to find there. This is the last and most important thing that no one tells you about life after 80, that it contains things worth finding, not in spite of everything that is difficult about it, not as a consolation for the losses, but genuinely and in its own right. Things that are only available here, in this particular light, at this particular distance from everything you have lived. A patience you could not have summoned at 50, a capacity for stillness you were too restless to access at 60. A clarity about what actually matters that could only have been earned by living long enough to watch everything else fall away. A relationship with your own life that is finally, after all these years, honest. Nobody prepares you for 80, but if someone had tried to prepare me, I would want them to have said this, that what is waiting for you there is not only what you are afraid of, that alongside the difficulty, and sometimes right at its center, there is something that looks, if you can find the angle to see it clearly, remarkably like grace. That the years after 80 are not the closing of a door. They are a room you have never been in before. And the things in that room, the particular qualities of light and silence and understanding that exist only there, are worth every difficult step it took to arrive. Go slowly when you get there. Pay attention. The room is full of things that took a lifetime to prepare for you, and you deserve to take the time to see them all.